Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. Mon nom est Catherine Lévesque. Je suis journaliste pour le National Post et je serai votre modératrice aujourd'hui. So today we have with us the Prime Minister, le très honorable Justin Trudeau. Nous avons aussi la vice-première ministre et ministre des Finances, Chrystia Freeland. We have the President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Bill Blair, the Minister of Public Safety, Mendicino, and the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, David Lametti. So Prime Minister Trudeau will make a few remarks and then we will turn to questions. A reminder, it is 20 minutes of questions, 10 in the room and 10 on Zoom. À vous, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. Je suis accompagné aujourd'hui de la vice-première ministre Freeland et des ministres Lametti, Mendicino et Blair. These past weeks have been incredibly difficult for the people of our capital city, and they've been stressful and disturbing for all Canadians. The situation is not anything anyone wanted, and quite frankly, not anything we'd want to see again. Lundi dernier, après avoir consulté les provinces et les territoires, le gouvernement fédéral a invoqué la loi sur les mesures d'urgence. Mardi, le poste frontalier de Coutts, en Alberta, a été rouvert. Et mercredi, le barrage à Emerson, au Manitoba, a été levé. Aujourd'hui, les familles et les travailleurs d'Ottawa sont en voie de retrouver leur quartier et leur liberté. I want to take a moment to thank the law enforcement agencies from across the country who joined the operations. And I want to continue to thank them as they ensure that, among other things, Canada's border crossings remain open, including in Windsor, and that all communities are safe. We didn't want to use the Emergencies Act. It's never something to turn to without serious consideration. But after weeks of dangerous and unlawful activities, after weeks of people being harassed in their neighborhoods and small businesses forced to close, after billions of dollars were stalled in trade, putting people's jobs and livelihoods at risk, after the National War Memorial was desecrated, after evidence of increased ideologically motivated violent extremism activity across the country, after a flood of misinformation and disinformation washed over Canada, including from foreign sources, after these illegal blockades and occupations received disturbing amounts of foreign funding to destabilize Canada's democracy, it became clear that local and provincial authorities needed more tools to restore order and keep people safe. For the past few days, parliamentarians have been debating the Emergencies Act and will be voting on it tonight. I ask all members of Parliament to take action against illegal blockades and to stand up for public safety and for the freedom of Canadians. Invoking the Emergencies Act has been necessary. Law enforcement agencies relied on it to set up secured areas in downtown Ottawa and at border crossings. It prevented foreign money from continuing to fund illegal blockades, and it's making sure our borders remain open. It has been the responsible thing to do. We now have a choice to make as a society. We can choose to keep reliving these scenes that tear at the values that bind us as Canadians, or we can choose to remember who we are and the best vision of what Canada can be. What we've seen in these past weeks is not the story of this pandemic. The story of this pandemic is one of unity and solidarity. La pandémie, c'est l'histoire des travailleurs de la santé qui se présentent chaque jour au travail, peu importe leur fatigue et les difficultés qui les attendent. C'est l'histoire des camionneurs et des travailleurs de première ligne qui font tourner notre économie. C'est l'histoire des enfants et des aînés qui sont restés forts et résilients. On a vu les gens partout au pays travailler ensemble et s'adapter collectivement pour sauver des vies. On a les taux de vaccination parmi les plus élevés au monde. On a tous fait des sacrifices, et oui, ça a été difficile. 36 000 Canadiens ont été emportés par la COVID-19. C'était des grands-parents, des parents, des enfants, des amis et des voisins. Mais à travers tout ça, on était là, les uns pour les autres. Through this pain and heartbreak, Canadians answered the call because Canadians are good people. We're among the world leaders in vaccination and health outcomes, as well as in economic recovery and job creation. It took courage. It took resilience. But we did it together. And despite the many challenges that we faced, our democratic institutions remain strong. We don't always agree, and that's okay. In fact, it's not only healthy to have debates in a democracy, it's necessary. Our government will always defend freedom of expression and freedom of peaceful assembly. These values are at the core of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They're at the core of who we are as Canadians. In a democracy, you can protest, you can share your opinion at the top of your lungs. You can disagree with elected officials. You can certainly disagree with me. But you can't harass your fellow citizens who disagree with you. You can't hold a city hostage. You can't block a critical trade corridor and deprive people of their jobs. You can't attack journalists for reporting, which is essential to our democracy. What you can do is vote. What you can do is run for office. That's how change happens in a democracy. On est tous fatigués de la pandémie, mais ça ne donne pas le droit de participer à des occupations et à des barrages illégaux ou de mettre les autres en danger. Et c'est inacceptable d'attaquer un journaliste parce qu'il fait son travail ou de faire de l'intimidation et de brimer la liberté de presse. Il n'y a pas de doute que les dernières semaines ont été éprouvantes, que les dernières années ont été douloureuses et qu'il reste encore des défis à relever devant nous. Mais on ne peut pas laisser la colère nous diviser. More than ever, now is the time to work together. It's also the time to reflect on the kind of future we want for our country. There's a lesson for all of us in what happened this month. We don't know when this pandemic is going to finally end, but that doesn't mean we can't start healing as a nation. And it starts with all of us. If you spend a lot of time online, try looking outside your social media bubble every now and then. If you have a cousin who you haven't seen in a while because they're unvaccinated or because they're vaccinated, give them a call. If a political conversation got heated during a recent gathering and a friend or relative left early, pick up the phone. Not to try to convince them, not to argue, but simply to ask how they're doing. Look, in the heat of the moment, we can all get carried away trying to win an argument. But not every single conversation has to be about winning an argument. Sometimes it's more important to just be there for one another. As a country, let's aim for more decency in our public discourse, not less. Let's cherish the democracy that we have, and let's commit ourselves every day to working together to make it even better. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier Ministre. So, like I said, we will have 20 minutes of questions, starting with questions in the room. So we have 10 minutes. I would ask you, ministers and the Prime Minister, if you could keep your answers short. That would be greatly appreciated because we have a lot of questions in the room and on Zoom. And for people on Zoom, if you could use the raise hand function to indicate that you have a question, that would be greatly appreciated. And on va commencer avec David Thurton, CBC.
Hi, Prime Minister. Do we still need the Emergencies Act? The blockades have been cleared. Parliament Hill has been cleared. Do we still need it?
As I said, the Emergencies Act is not something to undertake lightly, and it's something that needs to be momentary, temporary, and proportional. That's why every single day I'm receiving briefings and we are reflecting on how much longer the Emergencies Act needs to be in place. We don't want to keep it in place a single day longer than necessary. But even though the blockades are lifted across border openings right now, even though things seem to be resolving very well in Ottawa, this state of emergency is not over. There continues to be real concerns about the coming days, but we will continue to evaluate every single day whether or not it is time and we are able to lift this state of emergency. But I will turn to Ministers Mendicino and Blair, who on this question wanted to say a couple of words.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and thank you for the question. Look, I think there's no doubt that we have seen significant progress here in Ottawa, and after 3 weeks of torment for local residents, for small businesses, for you folks who've been reporting, and you know, the images have been shocking and at times and deeply concerning. This morning and yesterday, we saw calm, peace, and quiet. And I think that that was certainly a sense of relief for all of us. But we know that there are still a number of individuals who are affiliated with the illegal blockades who are in the area. Just this morning, we saw that there's some reports for a potential activity in the area. So we have to remain vigilant, and not only in Ottawa, but at our ports of entry. A couple of days ago, there was an effort to try and block Surrey, an important trade corridor at the Pacific Highway. We continue to watch very closely activities in Windsor, and we're following the advice of our law enforcement. And I would just point out that we've had a number of individuals reach out, including the Canadian Association Chiefs of Police, the Ontario Association Chiefs of Police, the Canadian Association of Police members, who are the rank and file, who have said to us with a very clear and singular voice that the Emergencies Act is a tool that is continuing to not only address the illegal occupation here in Ottawa, but also being used very effectively to prevent future blockades. Now, I want to echo exactly what the Prime Minister said, which is, I think, a sentiment that we all share across government, and that is we do not want to use the Emergencies Act for a single moment longer than is necessary. And I believe that when you survey the conduct of law enforcement over the last number of days, what you have seen is restraint. I mean, take a look at the way that the police carried themselves throughout the course of dealing with the illegal occupation here in Ottawa. There was a degree of professionalism and focus, despite the fact that there was an emotionally charged atmosphere, despite the many provocations and intimidation, and at times efforts to assault police officers. And that, despite all of that, we saw a minimum use of force. So I think that that kind of conduct will continue to carry through the Emergencies Act, but we won't use it for any longer than is necessary.
Ministers, we have 10 minutes only for questions, and we're using it all up on the first one. You want to stay for an extra 10, break.
Yep.
Bill?
You know, I'll take your point, David. I think clearly the police have used and the measures that we brought forward in the Emergency Act appropriately and to significant effect. We're pleased with the progress that's being made. We're monitoring on a daily and even hourly basis the threat environment with our senior officials and with law enforcement, and we are committed to ending this emergency at the earliest opportunity. But clearly, we're not out of the emergency yet, and so we'll continue to monitor that very carefully. I hope that's satisfactory, David.
Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Si la loi est utilisée de façon préventive, quel est le seuil pour l'enlever? Parce que les camionneurs pourraient revenir dans 2 mois, dans 3 mois. Est-ce que ça veut dire qu'il faut la garder pendant 2-3 mois?
Non, effectivement, c'est une réflexion que nous sommes en train d'avoir. C'est certain qu'à un moment donné, quand ça va être levé, on doit être vigilant à ce qui pourrait se passer après. Mais on sent encore que ces jours-ci, dans le moment présent, la situation est encore fragile. La situation d'urgence est encore présente. Nous allons continuer de surveiller au jour le jour pour voir quand est-ce qu'on pourra le lever. Ce ne sera pas pour l'immédiat, mais à tous les jours, on va réévaluer, puis on n'espère pas le garder une journée de plus que nécessaire.
Hi there, it's Annie Bergeron-Oliver for CTV National News. My question is for Minister Freeland, I believe. Two Conservative MPs say that their constituents who donated small amounts, about $50 or so, have had their bank accounts frozen. I'm wondering if this is a case of a mistaken use of powers granted to banks under the Emergencies Act, or is the government going after any donor, including small donors?
I'll turn to Minister Freeland in a second, but the measures that we put in place are designed and focused on ensuring that people in the current illegal occupations leave. That has been the intent and the focus right now. If there are specific cases that Conservative ministers can bring forward to highlight where that is not the case, we would happily look at them and hope to resolve them. But I'll turn over to Minister Freeland.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the question. So first of all, just as the Prime Minister said, particularly right now, at a time which is very fraught, it's important for all of us to be very, very careful to get our facts exactly right in each circumstance. And I would urge all of us to take that care in every situation. In terms of the financial measures, the RCMP has given to the financial institutions names of leaders and organizers of the protests and of people whose trucks were part of occupations and blockades. That is the only information, according to the RCMP, that the RCMP has given to financial institutions. I think it's also really important for everyone to be clear, and this speaks to the getting our facts straight point, that these measures applied only as of the 15th of February. That is when financial support of these illegal blockades and occupations began to be sanctioned. And then finally, let me say, for anyone who is concerned that their accounts may have been frozen because of their participation in these illegal blockades and occupation, the way to get your account unfrozen is to stop being part of the blockade and occupation. These measures were put in place to disrupt illegal activity in Canada. And, we were very clear last Monday that we would be following the money, that we would be using financial tools to disrupt illegal blockades and occupations. The focus absolutely has been on leaders and on the vehicles that were such an important part of the illegal blockades and occupations. That has been the only focus of law enforcement. Thank you.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Je voudrais savoir, est-ce que vous allez imposer la ligne de parti pour le vote de ce soir et en faites-vous un vote de confiance?
Bien, tout d'abord, j'ai de la misère à imaginer qu'un parlementaire qui vote non à ces mesures ce soir pourrait imaginer que c'est autre chose que de démontrer la confiance dans la responsabilité, la confiance et la compétence du gouvernement. Mais j'ai tout à fait confiance que la majorité des parlementaires vont ce soir voter pour protéger la règle de droit, pour protéger les Canadiens et leur communauté et leur liberté. I can't imagine that anyone who votes no tonight is doing anything other than indicating that they don't trust the government to make incredibly momentous and important decisions at a very difficult time. But like I said, I am confident that the majority of parliamentarians will stand up to support our values, to stand up to support our democracy, and to stand up to support their fellow Canadians. J'ai répondu.
David Aiken, Global News. Thank you for taking our questions, and thank you for the kind words about supporting our work. I'd suggest the best way to do that, of course, is take an extended amount of time for questions from journalists. I heard what you said in reply to my friend David Thurton, and I heard the very same similar lines repeated by Minister Mendicino, repeated by Minister Blair, where you don't want this to go on for 1 second longer. I really want to press you. Give us a specific power in the Emergencies Act, which is vital right now, that is not present in the provincial emergency orders, in the criminal code, and any other number of statutes that already exist. What specifically is in that act that is so vital right now to protect Canadians?
We saw for a number of days and weeks into the blockades that it was extremely difficult to get tow trucks to come and tow big rigs. One of the specific measures is an ability to compel tow truck drivers to come and do their jobs. When the Emergencies Act was brought in, many tow truck companies said, okay, we'll do it, didn't need to be compelled, but there were some companies that needed to be compelled under the Emergencies Act to remove trucks. And we've seen right now that there are trucks holding in places like Arnprior and Embrun and other places that are have indicated an indication, a desire or an openness to returning to blockades right now. So that is a power we may well need. The power to designate critical infrastructure like border crossings as not just the actual border crossing itself, which of course is protected under current legislation, but the approaches to border crossings, 15 kilometers up the road from Coutts, for example, or the municipal approaches to the Windsor crossing that require police to be able to designate that as areas where people not just occupying, but indicating a desire to go and occupy that intersection can be turned away. Just in the past days, there was a convoy from Fort McMurray destined for Ottawa that was largely turned away at the Manitoba-Ottawa border based on the laws and the powers in the Emergencies Act. Now, this is not something that we want to imagine continuing indefinitely in Canada. We hope to only keep it in place for a number more days. We will reevaluate every single day. But right now, when the situation is still of people pre-positioning, people being out there indicating that they are ready to blockade, to continue their illegal occupations, to disrupt Canadians' lives, we feel that this measure needs to remain in place while this emergency situation is still in place. And I could give other occasions, but I'll turn to another question instead to try and get as many as possible.
Sir Lee Berthiaume, Canadian Press, good to see you. You've said you don't want to keep the Emergencies Act any longer than necessary, but you have also said that you want to make some of the new powers around fundraising platforms, reporting to FinTrack permanent. I'm wondering what other powers you're looking at making permanent, what other changes after this crisis have passed.
One of the things that is important and right about the use of the Emergencies Act is there are already many mechanisms around review and oversight, whether it's a parliamentary committee, whether it's an inquiry afterwards, whether it's a need for openness and transparency, whether it's even court cases that are coming forward to challenge it. All those are part of the checks and balances that make sure that these actions we took are the right ones, which we know they are. At the same time, there needs to be a reflection about misinformation and disinformation and how Canadians' lives can be disrupted by it. There needs to be a reflection on foreign funding of illegal actions in our country designed to disrupt or destabilize our democracy. There have to be reflections on our ability to keep our borders open and free-flowing and protect critical infrastructure like the seat of our democracy. These are things that will be debated and reflect on in time. We will work with parliamentarians to move forward in a way that is responsible and properly measured to react and proact in terms of what we see potentially coming in the coming years.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to go on questions on Zoom. On va commencer avec Hélène Buzetti, les coop de l'information.
Oui, bonjour. Ma question est pour la ministre Freeland. Oui, bonjour, Madame Freeland. Tout à l'heure, vous avez dit que la façon de faire dégeler vos comptes qui ont été gelés, c'est de ne plus prendre part aux barricades. Or, il n'y a plus de barricades. Alors, est-ce qu'on doit comprendre que les fonds seront dégelés sous peu? Et le serait-il si, mettons, ce soir, le vote devait être négatif, est-ce que automatiquement ça dégèle ces comptes? Et si je me permets de rentrer une petite question, le maire Watson dit qu'on devrait vendre les camions qui ont été saisis. Est-ce que la loi le permet?
OK, merci pour la question. Je veux commencer en disant que c'est très important d'avoir des données qui sont exactes. Les noms précis des congelés ne sont pas partagés avec les politiciens. Et c'est absolument correct. Deuxièmement, comme j'ai juste dit, les policiers ont partagé avec les institutions financières les noms des leaders, des blocages et occupations et les noms des camionneurs. C'est le focus, c'est le cible de ce que les agences policières ont fait. Concernant ce qu'on doit faire pour dégeler des comptes bancaires. Premièrement, on doit se souvenir que les comptes bancaires peuvent être gelés pour beaucoup de raisons. Et beaucoup de raisons qui n'ont aucun lien avec les barrages et l'occupation. Et c'est important d'être certain que le compte n'est pas gelé pour une autre raison complètement. Si on est certain que le compte est gelé à cause des actions illégales qui sont liées avec l'occupation et le barrage, on doit parler avec les policiers qui vont parler avec les organisations financières pour dégeler les comptes. Et finalement, concernant les comptes qui sont gelés, c'était une action prise pour finir avec les barrages et l'occupation. Une action qui n'est pas rétroactive, une action qui était vraiment ciblée. Ce n'était pas une action permanente, une action qui est... on n'a pas aucune intention ou le droit de prendre l'argent des gens. C'était vraiment pour finir avec ces occupations et barrages illégaux. Et je peux me répéter en anglais si c'est utile, mais... Non, n'est-ce pas? OK, merci.
Et sur les camions, peut-on les vendre?
Concernant les camions, j'ai parlé des pouvoirs fédéraux et il y a aussi des actions, des pouvoirs qui restent avec les municipalités et les provinces. Merci.
Parfait. We're going to go to John Ebbetson, Globe and Mail.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Concerning the situation in Ukraine, if Russia were to recognize the independence of Luhansk and Donetsk and send troops into the region, would that be sufficient to trigger sanctions by Canada? And if it were not sufficient, why would that not be the case?
First of all, we continue to see Russia positioning itself and trying to create excuses or reasons to violate Ukrainian territorial integrity, to violate the sovereignty of Ukraine. And we continue to stand against all such measures. We will fully stand for the entire territorial integrity of Ukraine and do not recognize any attempts to independently recognize or autonomize the separatist-occupied regions of eastern Ukraine. Canada stands with Ukraine. Canada stands with its allies against this aggressive Russian positioning and will respond strongly and firmly with our allies in the case of any territorial violation of Ukraine.
Understood. I suppose what we're asking for, though, is some sense of a threshold. What actions the Russians would need to take before Canada would feel justified, indeed required, to initiate a response?
As our allies, as Americans, as Canada, as European allies have been clear, any violation of Ukraine's current territorial integrity will be seen as a violation by Russia of some founding principles of the UN and of the rule of law as we practice it around the world right now.
Raymond Filion, TVA.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Vous avez dit en ouverture qu'il y a une leçon pour tous dans ce qui est arrivé ce mois-ci. Je me demandais quelle est la leçon pour vous?
Bien, tout d'abord, que les Canadiens sont fatigués, sont tannés de la COVID, sont tannés des restrictions. Ils veulent en finir avec. Et pour la grande majorité des Canadiens, ils savent très bien que la façon de passer à travers, c'est de continuer de faire attention et de savoir que ça s'améliore quand on fait confiance à la science. Mais il y a aussi des gens qui, pour toutes sortes de différentes raisons, ont été mal informés, se sont retrouvés dans des situations difficiles, personnelles, qui sont très fâchés contre les institutions, contre la science, contre leur gouvernement. Et nous devons, en tant que société, de d'abord reconnaître que la façon qu'on a passé à travers cette pandémie, mieux que la plupart des autres pays semblables, c'est parce que les gens ont tellement été là les uns pour les autres. Et comment on va en finir avec cette pandémie et même finir avec cette crise d'occupation et de barricades, c'est d'assurer qu'on continue d'être là les uns pour les autres. Et c'est ce sur quoi je vais toujours mettre l'emphase, mais d'être là les uns pour les autres ces jours-ci, c'est d'être là pour les citoyens d'Ottawa qui veulent revenir à leur vie quotidienne. C'est d'être là pour les travailleurs de Windsor qui ont vu des usines fermées à cause des barricades. C'est d'être là pour les gens à travers le pays qui ne veulent pas de voir des violences ou des occupations illégales. On va continuer d'être là les uns pour les autres et essayer de rassembler, de guérir les Canadiens le mieux qu'on peut.
Est-ce que vous avez, vous, des regrets sur la façon dont vous avez géré la situation dans les 3 dernières semaines? Il y en a plusieurs qui vous ont adressé des reproches de ne pas avoir dialogué, etc. Avez-vous des regrets?
Il y a toujours des choses à laquelle il faut réfléchir après toute crise, après toute action. Mais je pense qu'on a été très, très clair à chaque étape que la façon d'influencer les politiques publiques, les façons de changer les choses dans une démocratie, c'est pas par des actes illégaux, c'est pas par des occupations qui font mal à vos concitoyens, c'est avec de l'action politique, d'aller voter, comme les Canadiens ont fait il y a 6 mois, mais aussi si vous voulez vraiment changer les choses, portez-vous candidat dans les prochaines élections. Encouragez les Canadiens de vous appuyer pour pouvoir amener des changements. C'est comme ça que ça fonctionne dans une démocratie. Nous ne pouvons pas tout simplement dire « Ah, il y a des mesures impopulaires, on va barricader le Parlement et on va les forcer de changer d'idée ». C'est pas comme ça que fonctionne notre démocratie. Si ces gens-là ont vraiment le désir de changer la direction du pays, bien, il y a des moyens de faire ça, de se présenter dans les élections, de se faire élire et d'avoir l'appui et l'approbation de la majorité des Canadiens et pas de ceux qui vous entourent dans votre cercle restreint.
And we have time for one last question. We're going to go to Jacques Gallant, Toronto Star.
Hi, good morning. Prime Minister, you mentioned earlier about oversight and you talked about the parliamentary committee. I'm wondering, when will that committee be struck and what exactly will it be able to do? What exactly will its powers be?
Part of the rules around formation of the Emergencies Act is the striking of a joint parliamentary committee between the House and the Senate to report back on the use of the Emergencies Act after the Emergencies Act had been in place, to talk about how it was used and to report back in a fulsome way. The discussions are ongoing with the various parties on exactly that issue. David, do you want to speak to that? Sure.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Jacques. It's a wide-ranging set of powers that the committee has to go back and look at. First of all, the declaration, the justifications contained in that declaration, any orders, as well as the implementation of those orders. So, and as well as forward-looking advice for what we might want to do down the road. So that committee has a wide-ranging set of responsibilities, I would say, first, as well as powers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And Prime Minister, I wanted to ask you again this question that you got earlier, but I don't think I heard a response. Is tonight's vote a matter of confidence?
Like I said, I can't imagine anyone voting against this bill as expressing anything other than a deep mistrust in the government's ability to keep Canadians safe at an extraordinarily important time. But like I also said, I am confident this bill is going to pass.
And that is the end of our press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup au Premier ministre, aux ministres qui ont pu rester quelques minutes de plus finalement. Bonne journée. Thank you.